Hey everybody, welcome to, I guess it's kind of Sonic Lab presentation type special thing. It's been a long time, Dave, since we've had one of these with you, and they're usually in person, but things as they are, it's actually probably easier with software to do it this way. Of course, this is the Oddity 3. Was it 3 or Mark 3? I guess that'd be a bit confusing, isn't it, if you call it a Oddity Mark 3, because there is a kind of a Mark 3. So how would you describe it?
Oddity 3, definitely, yeah. But it has got the livery of Mark 1, Mark 2 and Mark 3.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's interesting because, I mean, this is... I was wondering what makes one go, three deep into something like this, because obviously the original didn't go for polyphony. I think you went to duophony, didn't you? And then obviously Mark II, you added polyphony, and now you've done a bunch of other things. But, you know, taking it outside of the original scope of the instrument, but I know you've always been very keen on it. I mean, what is it about the Oddity the original Odyssey, that kind of does it for you? What is it?
It's just got a tone and it's got a character. I mean, for me, that was 20 years ago we did original Oddity. And obviously everybody was looking at doing mini Moog emulations and stuff. And it was just like, I don't know, there was something that Billy Curry said to me years and years ago, which was, the Odyssey was the kind of first punk synth. It just was raucous enough to cut through the guitars. But for me, it had a real funk element that obviously came from people like Herbie Hancock and Chick Corea and other players.
George Duke.
George Duke, amazing. I mean, he made that thing sing. And then there was that duophonic mode. And for me, the absolute key thing was, when you use the ring modulator in duophonic mode, and you can get these really amazingly aggressive kind of intervals, and it really is it's just raucous. So yeah, it was just that it covered the full range of things, and it was obviously a massive challenge.
Yeah, no, I know you, because you get into sort of really deep with these things. Let's sort of what are the new things with the Mark III? I mean, what can we look forward to? What's the stuff that makes it a version 3? Sorry, I beg your pardon. There we go. I'm already cocked out. So where what is the actual what makes it a version 3?
I mean, the biggest request we'd had over the years was obviously resizable interface. Oddity 1 and 2 were built using a kind of core library that over time had kind of become obsolete. So this was a sort of ground up re-engineering. So really the key things are resizable interface, macros we opted for instead of patch morphing. Patch morphing was okay, but if you selected a sound where the switches were in different positions, the switches would jump. So there was a kind of inelegance there. And completely redone patch management system, loads of stuff under the hood, the obligatory vintage mode knob, which, can make it a tightly calibrated machine, or kind of messes with a load of stuff under the hood to give kind of variables and stuff. Added a couple more effects, distortion and the reverb, same reverb as in OBE.
That's nice.
Yeah.
That's got a good bit of width and depth, and it goes long. I like a long reverb. You know me. Okay, so what? Sorry. So what in terms of patches? What you've obviously had a bunch done for this. I mean, have you got a kind of selection? Where would you jump if I was to say, okay, so what makes it what it is? Have you got a single patch to go? This one. You need to listen to this one first. Have you got one of those that we can hear?
It's kind of variable, really. Yeah. I mean, because it's so versatile. And in fact, what was fascinating from our perspective, it was Chris who pointed it out, is that with the additional XLFOs and ADSRs that you can put on the sliders, it's become much more kind of cinematic. But what I love about it is obviously this all stems from the heart of the original instrument, which I think it was last week was 50 years old.
Wow.
So it's amazing how that kind of those fundamental choices of parameters have just kind of evolved and evolved and evolved. I mean, really what we did is there's a bunch of alpha patches which are included in the demo. First one, is Oddity 3 Persuader.
Starsky and Hutch.
Pause there a bit for that. Yeah, exactly. Let's see how many copyright strikes we get on this. So yeah, it's
right.
That kind of growl from it in the bottom.
And there's
end.
a lot of touch going on there as well. I could feel that. Yeah. And
I mean, obviously, Oddity 2 had velocity dynamics. Oddity 3, but it didn't have aftertouch. Whereas in Oddity 3, again, kind of big request. It was like, right, okay, let's put that in. Okay. And a few more destinations on velocity.
So that's a sort of classic mono, and I think I heard some reverb on there as well. So any other? What's next in your kind of? I must put a list of patches together for this video piece we're doing.
Well, I mean, if you want the kind of hard sync sound, there's one here, Drive Time. And actually, that's a really good opportunity to show off some of the macro stuff. So we've got 4 macros down here. Macro 2 is linked to ADSR decay and VCO2 frequency course. So if I click on that, that's open as it is. So let's just shut that down.
That's nice down there, isn't it? And I can see that's got a bit of distortion on it as well, which is adding a bit of burn. I mean, it's quite a gritty synth anyway.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, we've always said, that with once you introduce the ring mod and the hard sync and stuff, Oddity just goes, Oddity 1 and 2 went to 11. This has got the ability to go to 12, but sometimes you've got to be careful. You can't kind of overcook it because, some of the kind of gnarlier tones, it's very hard to make them even gnarlier.
Yeah.
So yeah, just use sparingly, like everything in life, in moderation.
Oh, wow. What a grand philosophy, Dave. If only I could follow that myself. I tend to go for the 11, 12 and the reverb up to maximum. Talking of polyphony and reverb, there must be something in there that does a bit. I'm sure I've heard some demos where it really just starts to sound absolutely lovely in that respect as well.
Yeah, let's try. Actually, with the duo mode, so a classic one, Bite the Hand. So this is duophonic. Actually, let's come out of there so you can kind of see what's going on. So first note is both oscillators. Second note, if I play that at the same time as the first note, latches VCO2, but because we got the ring modulator on it, this is where we start to get those amazing inharmonic and harmonic tones. That's the inharmonic tone, so I'm just playing a C and a C sharp in the top end. So
nice. It's interesting. Ring mod almost sounds like distortion, and I can see that there's no drive on that at all. It's just
No, it's again, it gets back to that kind of really gnarly character of the original instrument. I think, and that was one of the reasons why on Oddity 1 we left it as monophonic and duophonic, because we wanted a whole new generation to kind of discover those tones. And actually, this patch is based on a 9 Inch Nails, Bite the Hand that feeds.
So, I'm curious because when you go, we've seen it before, when you take sort of filter designs and whatnot in analog and you start to push more voices through them, they behave very differently. Do you get are you dealing with the same principles when you're working that in software? So, suddenly you're playing 8 notes through a filter that was designed to have 2. Does the gain structure and the way that it responds kind of need to be tweaked and, whatnot?
Yes, and particularly when you're using the distortion. I mean, effectively, you've got a raft of gain structure because you've got each oscillator here. Yeah. So there's your sub, VCO1, VCO2. Then you've got the VCA gain, and then obviously you've got distortion. So it's, if you push everything too hard, you can just get into that situation where everything's a kind of square wave, and a bit messy.
Right, okay. Let's have some more sounds then. Be like Desert Island Patches.
Yeah, I mean, really, for me, there are some real standout sounds. I mean, you can see there's a fair amount of modulation stuff going on here. So each of the blue illuminations you see, that means that it's got an XLFO or an XADSR attached to it. So these
are the extra modulation sources that you've put in.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, and these are, you can do amazing stuff with really subtle degrees. But I mean, most people, like I say, you have no soul if you don't lose yourself for hours on this particular patch.
That's a real antidote to the tech nightmare we just had trying to set this whole thing up. Just because when you're routing all of this business over streaming, it can be a nightmare. Is that a unipolar LFO? Because it sounds like, that sounds like it's unipolar because you're getting that nice interval. Or did you have to tune the oscillator?
It's not. You've got to tune it. No. I mean, effectively, it's done on the XLFO with a square wave. Let's see if we can find. So there you've got a square wave there. You've got a degree of amplitude. That obviously gives you your timing, so that's 4 beats. So yeah, you got to be very, very careful on the degree of amplitude. So you're getting the tone above and the tone below.
Right, and was that a 50? Or maybe.
Oh, I don't know, Nick. You're asking me
sounded a bit more.
Questions now.
So are the XLFOs? Is that one per voice or just a global ones? Are they?
Most of the main sliders, you can add an additional LFO or an ADSR via the XLFO and XADSR. The big frustration, obviously, with the original Odyssey was single LFO for everything.
Right.
So, obviously, over the years, we had this idea of like, oh, okay, hang on a minute. If you could put an LFO on anything or an envelope on anything, actually... Because everything in life is about modulation and vibrations. It's like you could do some pretty killer stuff.
Nice. That's a lovely patch, actually. I had a bit of tinkle in it as well, which is, and I mean that in a kind of sonic sense.
Yeah, so in terms of the more bell, macro 1 turns up more bell. So again.
Right, it's like an upper partial.
And then we can take that down.
What's that actually doing then? Because is it like a high oscillator or?
So what it is it's turning up the ring modulation, but because we've got the frequency of VCO2 really high and VCO1 low, it's basically dealing with that kind of the ring modulation resulting from those two being kind of tuned apart.
All right, next patch then, please, Doctor.
What would be an interesting one? Well, actually, there's quite a funny one here.
In the demo that you did, there was actually a proper 80s kind of style lead guitar solo, I thought, and I was thinking, Dave, that's so unlike you. Did you just go back to your roots there? Well, I bet you wigged out a bit with that, did you? Is that what this patch is? Is one of those patches?
Yeah, I wanted to, use the distortion, but with something kind of musical. And again, with macros and stuff, you can just get a degree of, just a nice degree of playability.
Suitably subtle.
Macro True kind of throws in this harmonic.
That's dreamy. Nice. And I suppose, because originally, I suppose it's in keeping of the vintageness of the Odyssey because it used to be considered quite a lead instrument. I remember George Duke played some fantastic solos for Zappa on the Odyssey, didn't he?
Amazing.
So, yeah, cool.
Yeah, totally amazing. I mean, obviously, we've got all the kind of, the usual suspects in there. There is somewhere, actually, this one might make a few people laugh. No prizes for guessing what this is. Fox in a subway.
Which would that have been an Odyssey back then? I suppose it might be.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
John's massive exponent of the original.
Because the thing about the Odyssey is it's that ARP way, which is when you maybe first confronted with this way of working, whether it's a 2600 or whatever, it's really like, I don't understand at all, because it doesn't make sense. It takes a little bit of kind of grok to kind of get your head around how it's operating, right?
I think the initial thing is people, assume that actually you turn the VCO volume up in the VCO section. But once you get used to the fact that, in this section we have an audio mixer, which then you introduce the filter. I mean, obviously the filter's here, but, in terms of the filter envelope, filter LFOs and stuff. But actually it is, once you get your head around this audio mixer section, it's pretty straightforward, and that's largely due to the kind of color-coded knobs, the color-coded tic-tacs. Anything VCO1 is going to be blue, like so. Right. VCO2, green. We put another oscillator on this, which we're defining as a sub. It was on Oddity 2 as well. That'll be the orange sliders.
So do you spend a lot of time? I mean, because this is revision 3, so do you spend a lot of time on the control law of those things, the way that the faders respond? Like whether they're linear, logarithmic, and you get those kind of all custom curves to the way the parameters affect things inside the synth.
It's all based on the hardware.
Right.
Most of them were 100K sliders. Bit of a nightmare to get hold of now on the originals. But yeah, I mean, really just trying to kind of capture that sort of essence and the controllability of the original.
Okay, let's have another patch then.
Well, I mean, you were saying about George Duke. Hey, I'm not George Duke, but... That's a kind of very standard Odyssey type lead.
It's got a lovely burn to it as well, hasn't it? I mean, you've got a bit of distortion on that, but it's very organic sounding.
Yeah, no, I mean, for me, the Odyssey really shone. I mean, what was interesting as well, because, Odyssey was only duophonic. So, with people like George and Herbie and stuff, their playing had to be so precise because, don't forget, if you had a kind of long release and you accidentally flipped an adjacent note, it would jump to that note, or you would hear that second note being adopted by VCO1 or VCO2. So again, in even Oddity 1, we kind of went, we need a mono mode for slack-handed players like myself.
Excellent. And I know that, I mean, you're a big pad fan. I've heard you play pads and stuff, so there must be a bunch of delicious ones in here. Speaking of which, I mean, can you set the polyphony count? I mean, is there an upper and a lower limit to the way that works?
Yeah, I mean, obviously 16 note is the max. It'll go all the way down to 1, which again is kind of interesting because some people love that kind of 5-voice Prophet 5 sort of pumping thing, where obviously if you're playing over the 5 notes, it'll cut off previous notes. That's become a kind of hip playing thing. So yeah, it's totally possible. In terms of other pads, I'll play a couple of little things. A Triumphant and Lush Odyssey. Again, give you an idea. Of how lush it can sound. In fact,
it's nice to see you got plenty of characters for the patch names. I like that because sometimes you cut them off and it's kind of like you can share these patches presumably quite easily. Do you just export individual ones or banks or whatever?
Yeah, they're all XML files now because previously they were what were they called, PBKs, and they were banked. That was basically one patch that had kind of 64 subs in there. It was an utter nightmare to kind of save out. There was all sorts of hoops that you had to jump through. Whereas now when you save a patch, we have all of the original Oddity 1, Oddity 2, Oddity 3, classic stuff which came from the patch manual, and then you've got a raft of tagging options. Right. You can name each of the macros. You've got an author. I love this one. Tom Wolfe did a really good job on this. I'm using the Hydrasynth. Obviously, we've got poly aftertouch, but I mean, this will give you an idea. So essentially the basic sound, but by using poly aftertouch.
Right. So, so it does poly aftertouch. Does it work on MPE? I mean, have you put MPE in there as well?
So it does the plus 48 pitch bend range, so you can use it in mono mode. We haven't gone full MPE at the minute. There's a reason for that I can't reveal, unfortunately.
Right.
Okay. But in due course, it will be.
Right.
And it may have something to do with an instrument that's about to come out. But I didn't say that.
Oh, okay. So I know, because we spoke to Tom previously when we were talking about the kind of single voice the SEM that you released. He's been doing some patches. Have you done patches on here as well? You must have programmed some patches as well.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. We had so many good people. I mean, Jerry Kowalski, Drew Schlesinger, who's voiced a million synths, Tom, obviously, Graham, myself, a load of other people. And what I loved is everybody kind of brought a different flavour to the instrument because, just people gravitate to kind of different tones.
I suppose, yeah, and I suppose putting macros in, the idea is also, you see this with a lot of people who program for software synthesizers, making sure that you're utilizing all of the performance type controls and that will radically shift and change the sound, because then that will encourage people to be more expressive and perhaps be more take a more synthesist approach.
Totally. For me, that's where a lot of the patches kind of came. It's like, where can I take this? You come up with your fundamental kind of tone, and then it was like, where can I take this? In fact, I will give you an example. I've got to find this. Okay. So there's no shortage of Frank Ellis, Vangelis CS80 patches out there. And I was actually kind of like, oh, I don't know. Do we really need to include this in Oddity? But there is something that's just so... So again, that's with the poly aftertouch, but using the macros, I think it's macro 3, I can change the attack. So for example, let's just try this. Fast attack. Slow attack. Fast attack again.
Nice. Yeah, that's very playable. Yeah, I see what you mean.
Again, it was a patch that I wasn't going to put in, and then I was just like, oh, hang on a minute, I'd just lose myself for hours in things like that.
Nice. And presumably with the macros, you just then assign a MIDI controller that you can just learn it very easily to that, or are they fixed assignments, or how does that work?
Well, the whole MIDI CC assignment thing's been completely redone. Before it was, I can't even remember what it was called, Autobind or something, and it was very of its time. Now we've got a standard. So in effect, I've got nothing really on here apart from modulation, except I've got controllers on the 4 macros there.
Is that global? Can you set them to be global as well, so that every time you change a patch, it doesn't need reassigning?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Nice.
Yeah. No. Totally. Everything is global on that front. So, for example, on this, in fact, let's just what have I got on that one? So that turns up the sub-os. And then that one is VCO2 up. But let's say I didn't want the sub-oscillator, and instead of the sub-oscillator, I wanted to put it on noise. So I literally just drag that over, right-click. That green line defines the amount when you turn it up. So when I...
Right, got you. So you've gone for sort of basic indication because, I mean, some people, there's a sort of split camp, isn't there? There's the kind of, you got to show every level of modulation. The panel should be moving all over the place with macros, and there's other people who say, no, you need to keep it simple. So I'm guessing for this, you decide to go for the more straightforward approach.
I just wanted the idea that, if you click on a macro knob or you move a macro knob, then you see what it's controlling. Right. So for that one, and then on macro 2, macro 3,
I see. Yep.
is tightening up our attacks, and then
the
macro
reverb.
4, of course, it's the reverb.
More reverb. That's nice. The obligatory 9 seconds, isn't it, with Frank? Oh, that's nice. That's an algorithmic reverb, presumably. And it sounds like there's modulation and stuff in there. Are there different reverb types, or have you just gone for a basic reverb type? Do you have
no, basic reverb type. I mean, there's 5 presets, from small to stupidly large. But the modulation is I think, a beautiful thing.
And can you modulate all of the? Can you macro up or modulate the effects into this? So can you? Is it just macros that will control that, or can you LFO things into the effects as well of the effects parameters?
Oh yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, you can do any of them. So I mean, for example, delay there, we could just put there's 2 beats, and then we'd apply a degree, and then when we come out of that, you can see that it's being controlled.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, I mean, the modulation possibilities are absolutely immense.
I think it's really important now with effects being such a major part of a synthesizer sound, particularly if you put them in there, obviously, then you want to be able to modify and modulate and get them on the bus or whatever. They really need to be accessible. So nice one.
Totally. In terms of distorted... again, this is kind of interesting. I've got 2 versions. I mean, not all of these patches are on the release version because obviously I'm constantly working on stuff. The appropriately named Distorted Polybastard. So there's your distortion, but what you can do and what I have done is put macros. So this controls the filter, but the X ADSR. So it's controlling this. So we've got to ramp up. The X LFO. So and then macro 2 controls the speed. And then nothing.
Nice.
But then you don't have to stop there, because with the aftertouch you can assign aftertouch to the macros. So you can trigger those macros from the aftertouch, and nice. That's where I kind of led on to Distorted Polybastard aftertouch macros. So this is just triggered by aftertouch.
That's nice. It's interesting, because it does take it into another world. As soon as you start adding polyphony and effects, then it becomes a synth it never could have been. And it's kind of interesting, isn't it? How do you sort of struggle? Because I know you're very keen on the essence and the spirit of these original instruments. Do you struggle with that kind of taking it any of the synths you work on into directions that perhaps they were never intended, or certainly the original never could have gone as it stood?
There's certainly an element of just because you can do something doesn't mean you should. And there are moments where it's like, we need to take stuff away now. Right, because it's gone too far. But I did a recent podcast for the Arp Foundation, and it was discussing how relevant the Odyssey was on its 50th anniversary, as to how relevant it was today. And one of the things that Dina said because we do take a bit of artistic license with what we do in terms of adding new features and stuff. And sometimes
like the film adaptation of the book.
Yeah, I guess so. But I mean, you want that kind of essence there. For me, it's like the essence. And there was a moment with OBE where we put the third oscillator on, and it was like, okay, so what we need to do is implement that in a way that perhaps Tom would have done back in the day. And that kind of judgment call always kind of lives with us. But what was amazing is when we were talking about Oddity 3 on the Arp Foundation video, Dina, Alan's daughter, said, this is exactly what my father hoped would happen, that people would take something from those days and kind of expand on it and take it into new territories. And that was an amazing moment because, like I said, there was a point where Chris and I was going through the patches with Chris, and Chris was like, this is just so different. In fact, at one point, Chris said, we could put a different UI on this and do it as another instrument.
It's interesting also because I know you when you did the movie, that you interviewed a lot of these guys and who are no longer with us. So you've got a kind of a moral connection there as well. I think you probably, which may not necessarily hold you back, but it makes you have more of a guardianship of that direction, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, it's really just paying homage to, the people who've come before us. I know we talk about this a lot, but it's like, we don't pretend to be. We just pay tribute. And actually the fun is kind of going, okay, so if we keep that kind of fundamental ethos of what this instrument was about and just see where we can take it. And like I say, with the, the XLFOs, the ADSRs, the macros and stuff, it starts to kind of, just spread it out, really. It kind of moves it into other territories.
Yeah, speaking of spread, I can see a knob for spread, and I want to hear how wonky vintage mode is as well, if that's not too much trouble.
So vintage note, well, actually, there's a little bit on this. I mean, this is just a pad that, again, takes advantage of the XLFOs and ADSRs so that you get a 3-octave kind of ascent. With the spread mode, you've got two... the spread mode, you've got two modes. You basically, everything starts from the center and then spreads outwards as you do that. So if I play bass notes... should hear that pan madly left and right, definitely, according to the top and bottom. And this is basically just a random, so it'll pan it. Let's just throw that to an extreme.
That's nice.
Vintage knob, let's take it back to a kind of fundamental sound. Again, with the new patch browser, you can, obviously, alpha patches, A to Z, Z to A. You can click a load of favorites. Let's take, I don't know, let's take that bugger. Maybe that's not the best example.
What are alpha patches? What's that? What does that mean? Are they kind of creme de la creme, or is that just a particular patch designer? What does that mean?
Alpha patches were the ones that we thought were the kind of show-off patches. So when you download the demo, you basically get access to the alpha patches, and that's it if you want to take it somewhere else. Candidates
for patch 0, as it were, if you were on a hardware synth, yeah.
Yeah, kind of. I mean, actually, let's try, where's that? Okay, so in terms of the vintage knob, Fusion lead line probably show that off okay. And then we turn the vintage knob up, and it should be...
So that drifts the oscillators. Does it do other stuff? Because I know in some synths, like the OBX, it probably tinkers with the filter tracking and all that kind of stuff, and so you get all sorts of wonkiness.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff that goes on under the hood. I don't know all the details, but essentially you can do things like get kind of really out, kind of detuned drones down the bottom end, and the top end will be kind of a little bit tighter. or vice versa and stuff. There's actually a lot under the hood.
Nice. So, well, I mean, maybe a couple more patches if you've got some that you want to show us.
Let's try. I mean, again, pad. Want a pad?
That's nice, and there's no spread on that either. I noticed. That's really interesting, and it still sounds very stereo.
Yeah. So give you an example of, again, using the macros in real time with it. So that second one is.
Love a fifth pad. Nice.
Most macro 4s are completely mad reverbs. I'm sure this is no different. So I'm in mad reverb and the high pass filter turned up.
Yeah, I approve. Of course.
That seemed to be a thing amongst the patch designers. We were trying to work out a kind of best practice, and it was like, okay, macro 1 has to be timbre, macro 2 could be a pitch thing. What could macro 4 be? And then it was like, and it was weird how everybody pretty much gravitated to the same. It was just
Loads
like,
of
crank that reverb up, turn that high pass up, get that kind of wash, which is great because you can hoik it back down and use it as a kind of drop, really.
That's interesting.
Get that kind of real breathy tone, but again with macro, I think it's 1, so we got a fast attack and release.
It's sort of PPG like. Yeah, there we go.
Or back in with a slow. But it can similarly just sound so aggressive, just so aggressive. I mean, for me. Very TB-like tones. Hang on, that's a track, isn't it? That's Omar.
There's nothing like this, isn't it?
This is not a love song.
Okay.
He does a version. Anyway, you get the idea. It's
Oh, okay. So I see that when you have the patch browser, you've got the macro knobs up there, right? Okay, I see.
Yeah, so you get to see those in real time.
Right. Oh, nice. Well, Dave, thanks very much for showing us. I mean, it's available now. It's been out for a little while, so it's not one of those situations where you're going, yeah, no, we'll be releasing it soon. It's right there, and I think it's still on offer, $49.99 from $99. I think that's till the end of November. I seem to read that somewhere. I know you don't necessarily know, but that's good in a charming kind of way.
I don't do money. If I did money, we'd have been bankrupt within the first week. And I know there's an upgrade deal for people who had Oddity 2 and stuff. So yeah, go to the website, have a look there.
I suppose the other thing, available for all formats. Is it M1 native? I don't know.
Yeah.
Oh, cool. Right.
Yeah,
Okay.
all good.
Excellent. Well, Dave, thanks ever so much for talking to us. Maybe you could just find some delicious Dreamy Pad you can play for a few seconds while we fade to grey, as it were.
I will. Thank you very much, Nick.